Is your doorbell building a facial recognition database on your block? The short answer is yes, soon it will be. But the story behind it is far more than about Amazon or home security. It's about the absence of real legal safeguards around one of the most personal forms of data that we have, our faces. And that's what we're exploring today on Open Tabs with Attorney Danielle. Let's get into it. Hi, I'm Attorney Danielle, and I cover all things tech, policy, law, and culture. And today we are talking Amazon Ring Camera's new Familiar Faces feature launching in December of 2025, which allows doorbell cameras to identify people using facial recognition technology. It's being marketed as convenient. Your device will tell you when your kids come home, when your delivery driver arrives, or when your mom drops by. But what is missing here is a legal framework, one that defines what happens when that same technology misidentifies someone, misuses your data, or captures people who never consented to it in the first place. Let's get into this a little deeper. So, what is going on? Amazon's Ring has announced it will begin rolling out facial recognition capabilities across some of its cameras and doorbells. The feature, called Familiar Faces, analyzes footage to detect, identify, and label individuals you've tagged in your video history. In other words, your front door can now learn who's who and keep a running memory of their appearances. Amazon says this feature is optional, meaning you have to turn it on yourself and that the data is stored locally on your device. But that doesn't mean others aren't impacted. Once activated, anyone passing in front of your camera, may it be a neighbor, a friend, or even a stranger, can have their image analyzed without ever consenting to it. And that is where the legal and ethical red flags start waving. Which brings us to the big issue here. What kind of data are we really talking about here? And why does everything change when that data is actually your face? Because facial recognition isn't just another tech feature. It's a part of a broader category called biometric data, information built from your body itself. That includes fingerprints, facial geometry, iris scans, voice patterns, and even the way you walk. And this is the reason why this is so different from other types of data. Biometric data isn't just personal, it's permanent. Think about it this way. If your password gets leaked, you can reset it. If your credit card gets stolen, you can cancel it. But if your face print or your fingerprint is compromised, that's it. You don't get another one. And that's why biometric privacy is more than just keeping your data safe. It's also about controlling who collects it, how it's used, and what rights you have once it's captured. And you would think that that level of sensitivity should come with serious legal protection, but it often doesn't. And it's interesting because your face can unlock your phone, your bank account, and even your front door, right? Yet the same data that protects you personally isn't protected legally. Because in the United States, there is still no comprehensive federal law governing how companies collect, store, or share your biometric data. So let's dig deeper into that and discuss the federal legal vacuum. Now, there is currently no federal framework that regulates the collection, storage, or sharing of biometric data in the United States. That means there's no universal federal rule requiring notice, consent, retention limits, or transparency about how your facial data is used. Companies like Amazon, Meta, and Google operate under their own self-imposed privacy policies, and the only real federal oversight comes through the Federal Trade Commission, mainly under Section 5 of the FTC Act, which prohibits unfair or deceptive practices. And even then, enforcement usually happens after a violation occurs, not before. Now compare this to Europe's General Data Protection Regulation, also known as a GDPR, which treats biometric data as a special category requiring explicit consent and clear limits on use. But in the United States, we only rely on a patchwork of laws and voluntary compliance. And this is a system that leaves consumers exposed and companies largely unaccountable. And that is why what Amazon just did is so significant. They are shaping the rules of engagement in the absence of federal law on facial recognition technology. So let's go deeper into this and talk about the patchwork of state biometric laws. Only a handful of states have passed dedicated biometric privacy laws, and they vary widely in strength. So let's start with Illinois, which I like to call the gold standard. Illinois' Biometric Information Privacy Act, or BIPA, has been on the books for some years now and remains the toughest biometric privacy law in the country. It requires written consent before companies can collect or store biometric identifiers, and they have to disclose why they're collecting it and how long they'll keep it. It also gives individuals the right to sue directly, which is rare in privacy law. That one clause is why we've seen multi-million-dollar settlements from some of the biggest tech companies. For example, Facebook paid $650 million, Google paid $100 million, and Snapchat paid $35 million, all for face tagging users without their consent. Now, compare that to Texas, where the Capture or Use of Biometric Identifier Act requires consent but does not let people sue. Only the state attorney general can enforce it. That means the law exists, but is mostly toothless unless the attorney general decides to act. And when Texas did decide to act, it was big, resulting in a $1.4 billion settlement with Meta in 2022. Then there's Washington State, where the law is even lighter. It was passed in 2017, and it allows companies to collect biometric data as long as they provide notice and a way to prevent disclosure. It doesn't require explicit consent, and again, only the Attorney General can enforce it. Now compare that to California, who takes a broader approach. Its Consumer Privacy Act and the stronger California Privacy Rights Act that amended it treat biometric data as sensitive, personal information. That gives consumers the right to access, correct, delete, or limit how companies use their data. But California still doesn't have a standalone biometric law with clear consent rules. Enforcement is handled by the state's Privacy Protection Agency and the Attorney General, not private citizens. And then there are cities that decide not to wait for Congress or their states to act. Portland, Oregon, and Baltimore, Maryland both passed ordinances banning the use of facial recognition technology by private entities or local agencies, citing civil rights and surveillance concerns. Baltimore's ban has since expired, but it does show how local governments are trying to fill the gap. And San Francisco made headlines back in 2019 as the first U.S. city to ban government agencies, including police, from using facial recognition technology. It was a big symbolic step, but here's the catch. It doesn't apply to private companies or consumer devices like Ring. So when we talk about privacy in America, what we're really talking about is a patchwork of state laws, local bans, and corporate discretion. And that brings us back to Amazon, because now with the rollout of familiar faces, we're about to see exactly how that patchwork plays out in real time. So I just gave you a whole lot of information there. So I know you're asking, where does all of this leave Ring's new familiar faces feature? Well, according to Amazon, the tool won't roll out in Illinois, Texas, or Portland. All of these are places where the legal landscape around biometric data makes its deployment risky. And I mean, that makes a whole lot of sense, right? Because Illinois' BIPA is the toughest law in the country. We discussed that it requires written consent from every individual whose biometric data is collected, not just the device owner. That standard is almost impossible to satisfy for a front door camera that records neighbors, delivery drivers, and passerbyers. And Texas law has similar consent requirements, but it's enforced only by the state attorney general, meaning Amazon likely chose to exclude Texas out of caution rather than legal necessity. And let's remember, Portland, Oregon goes even further because it bans private entities from using facial recognition technology in places of public accommodation, a rule broad enough to create a real legal uncertainty for Ring in shared or multi-unit settings. And again, Baltimore, Maryland briefly had a similar ban on private facial recognition technology, but it expired in 2022. So without renewal, there's no restrictions in place, and another example of how local protections can appear and then disappear overnight. And remember, in California, their laws classify biometric data as sensitive personal information, but they do not ban its use. They just give consumers rights to access it or delete it. And San Francisco's city ban applies only to government agencies, not private users, so Ring devices aren't restricted. And everywhere else, the feature is moving forward. Washington state's biometric law doesn't prohibit facial recognition use outright. It simply requires notice and prohibits unauthorized disclosure or sale of biometric data. As long as Amazon provides notice through its privacy policy and keeps the data stored locally, it's likely compliant. And that's the real point. Outside of a handful of states and cities, there's nothing on the books that explicitly limit or regulates this kind of consumer-level facial recognition. And with no comprehensive federal standard and few state laws that draw clear lines, companies like Amazon are effectively deciding what is permissible, and consumers are left to live with those choices. Because if we're honest with ourselves right now, your privacy doesn't depend on the technology you use or whether you consented. It depends on where you live. Now, let's talk about a word that continues to come up in our conversation: consent. Now, to be fair, Amazon says users can opt in to use facial recognition on the device. But here's the question: whose consent actually matters? The homeowners or the person being recorded? Because even if you, as the homeowner, consent to use Ring's familiar faces, the people being recorded, i.e., your neighbors, the delivery driver, or kids walking home from school, they never did. Yet their faces can still be scanned, analyzed, and sometimes stored in your device's database. And that is what is known as bystander privacy. And here's the thing about that: it doesn't legally exist in most of the country. And what I mean by that, there's no federal law recognizing your right not to be subject to someone else's private biometric surveillance. In most states, only the device owner's consent matters. So when you opt in, you're not just making a personal choice. You're making a legal choice for everyone who crosses your camera's field of view. And that's not meaningful consent. That's one person extending surveillance power over everyone else nearby. And this matters because it isn't just about home security, you guys. It's about a shift in power. When one person's right to feel safe becomes another person's loss of privacy, we have to start asking bigger questions about where consent ends and where surveillance begins. So I want to kind of get into that a little bit more, right? Because I want to go back a few years. Because for years, Ring had formal partnerships with hundreds of police departments across the country. Those agreements gave officers direct access to request footage from Ring users through an online portal, basically creating a nationwide crowdsourced surveillance network. Now, I believe Amazon ended those partnerships in 2023 after public backlash, but the ecosystem didn't disappear. These cameras are still everywhere. The neighborhood app provided by Amazon still encourages people to post clips and talk about what looks suspicious, which isn't always a bad thing, but you get where I'm going with this, right? And when this footage is posted publicly, police don't need a special portal to access it. They can just watch, download, or reach out directly to the person who posted it. So, what I'm getting at here is that even though the partnership is gone, the pipeline between private surveillance and public policing is still very much so alive. It's just running through community behavior instead of company policy. Now, add facial recognition to that mix. And the thing that I want you to take away from today's conversation is that Amazon's Familiar Faces rollout exposes a fundamental gap in American tech governance. And that's the fact that innovation moves fast, but the law moves slow. Without a federal framework, companies can define the rules for themselves, such as what counts as consent, how long data is stored, when it's shared, and whether it can be sold. And once that data exists, it becomes part of a broader ecosystem of surveillance, one that's difficult to control or undo. So the next time you see a smart feature marketed as convenience, ask yourself, what's the cost of this convenience? Who's accountable if it's wrong? Who's accountable if it's abused? And until Congress passes a national privacy law that includes biometric protections, these decisions are being made not by lawmakers, but by corporations. And that is a serious problem. Now, on to final thoughts. So, is Amazon's Ring spying on you? No, not exactly. But is it collecting, analyzing, and labeling biometric data in a legal gray zone where you have few rights and limited recourse? It sure is. It sure is. And as an attorney and tech policy professional, here's some advice to Ring camera users. Number one, read the fine print. Every platform tells you how they use your data, but it's your responsibility to read it and get the specifics. Number two, use biometric features only when necessary. Convenience and control do not always go hand in hand. And number three, push for stronger privacy protections at every level, federal, state, and local, because your safety or your level of protection of sensitive data shouldn't depend on your location. And for everyone who never opted in, the delivery driver, the kid walking home, the friend dropping by, you're part of this story too. That's why you need to be aware, because it impacts you, whether you have knowledge of the surveillance or not. And that is the real tension here for me. These devices don't just protect homes. They extend surveillance into everyday life, one camera at a time. And the law hasn't caught up to that reality yet. It still focuses on the person who bought the device and not the people who end up in its frame. And to bring this video to an end, you guys, we really have to think deeper as we go into this increasingly digital world, because we cannot continue to treat privacy as solely a consumer feature. We also have to look at privacy as a collective right. Well, guys, that's the end of this video. If you found this video helpful, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me your thoughts on Amazon's rollout in December. And I have a question for you. Would you enable familiar faces on your device? Or do you think it crosses the line between safety and surveillance? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're here, please remember to check out my podcast, The Miseducation of Technology, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and now right here on YouTube as well. Because technology may have been miseducated, but you do not have to be. See you next time on Open Tabs with Attorney Danielle. Bye.